All right, all right. Thank you guys for joining us. So I have a great group of panelists. We're waiting for one more gentleman to join us. All right, we got some mic action going on back there. While we start, since Laura, you'll be actually heading out a little early. Maybe talk to us a little bit about what first got you excited about the potential of RWAs and what you do at Van Neck in relation to that.
So at Benek, I lead investor relations and business development. I work really closely with our product team that looks into tokenization of assets. Is actually an area that we started exploring back in 2021, but it was still a little early. And we finally came to market about 2 months ago with our first product, which is the tokenized money market fund. Now, I know every asset manager has done the same play, but the way we see it, and I think it's the same way with the other asset managers, is a nice way to explore all the different partners, build an ecosystem, and see what our products want to bring to life. I think two of like the most interesting things here are one, they soon enough, hopefully, be able to do 24/7 settlement, and also you can use the blockchain as a transfer agent soon enough as well, hopefully. And these are some of the things that, from a vendor perspective, we're very excited about.
Awesome. And Matt, I keep hearing about Ondo in the news all the time. So you guys are doing good job on the marketing side, and excited to be having this conversation with you. Again, while we're waiting for Chris, maybe give us a little bit of background on yourself. What got you originally excited about RWAs?
Hi everyone, I'm Matt, head of DeFi at Ondo. A little background, been at Ondo for about 1.5 years now. Before that, I was on the institutional team at Polygon. Before that, 5 years in TradFi. I think the thing that got me most excited about RWAs is it's really about access, right? It's about being able to give people access to financial products that they didn't have access to before. So this goes all the way back to Tether, obviously, right? And before that to weird experiments on Bitcoin with like colored coins, and I'm dating myself here. But yeah, it's about access.
Right on. And Crystal and I met about 3 years ago, and you reminded me that you were thinking about RWAs a long time, and I feel like all of a sudden this term became like an acronym that everyone understands. But what sort of in that early juncture made you realize there was so much potential that you've been leaning in and building at a time when not everyone was aware of the potential?
First of all, I have to give a big shout out to everyone. Okay, so one thing I don't like when I go to a conference is that it's really fucking vanilla and boring. So let's not be boring. So I want to give a shout out to everyone here on stage because they're building something really special and they're ahead of the curve. What made me excited, not only about to meet Josh and Van Eck and Ondo, is that we are trying to be disruptive, right? Like people either like disruptive or not, but it is actually a term of art that is actually really useful. And so one of our other founders, we're in a technological transformative wave, guys. Okay. And if everyone could just kind of quiet down so that way you guys could actually really hear and like be engaged in the conversation.
Actually everyone in this room's quiet. It's all those folks out there. But...
All right. So my point is that what we want is to be able to help people. We want to disrupt finance in a way that we already know how it's going to happen. And so when I met Josh, he's always been a big proponent of like tokenizing credit. And he's always been a super huge fan. And so like I have to give a shout out to him and to everyone else for what they're doing, because like what we are doing is actually trying to effectuate change.
Right on. So let's talk about where we're at this present moment in the RWA landscape in terms of I guess like what's been the most promising RWA utility projects that have been actualized, and what is still holding this aspect of the industry back? Does anyone want to start?
I mean, I think what's holding us back real quick, and I'll let them jump over, is that I think that these are the two forerunners in the industry, right? And like you're tokenizing treasury, you're doing ETFs. Like these guys are ahead of the curve because they understand the future of finance is on the blockchain. What I think is holding us back is regulation and mass adoption with retail. The institutional play is coming into place right now, which is amazing. And so we just need to bind together to be able to let it surge.
Matt, Laura, you want to elaborate on the regulation narrative?
I actually, for tokenization, I'll say, and I'm curious to see what Matt has to say here, but I like to think in more from a perspective of where, right? Like, there's some products that make more sense in the US, others that make absolutely no sense in the US, right? Like tokenizing public equities in the US, you already have a financial system, you can access to it, and there's no problem. So whenever we talk about tokenizing assets, it has to be, the tokenized form has to be better than the non-tokenized one. Unless you just want to wipe completely the full financial system and build it all on.
There are those tokenization maxes just want to tokenize everything.
There's also the piece of like, well, maybe this will bring liquidity. If there's already a product that barely has any liquidity in the regular form, tokenizing it doesn't mean that it brings liquidity. It means that the transfer might be easier, but that doesn't mean liquidity itself, right?
Do you also think that there needs to be like a cultural zeitgeist within that given domain, that an openness to tokenization, or will that just come naturally?
Can you repeat the question? An openness?
Whether it has to be just an openness culturally in a given domain for tokenization, or whether the tokenization will just create that openness naturally.
I think it will create it naturally. Like the obvious initial products, I think they're coming naturally. And as that first foundation is built, then the second one will come, right?
Yeah.
Like for all of this, stable coins are mostly used in emerging markets, right? And all of these people that have a wallet, they're using stable coins, having access to tokenized US equities, for instance, is a really added value for them. So this is like an obvious use case that we need the regulatory part to see how that will look like. But I mean, we saw what did Robinhood on Monday, and there's been a bit of like different chatters, people being for and maybe not as for it, but it's a great first step into waking up regulators and having them look into it and write something.
I know.
I mean, yeah, to echo your point, I think liquidity is actually the number one thing I think most about when it comes to tokenization. And it's liquidity in two forms, right? It's like the dollars and value and like market makers, whatever. And then it's also liquidity in the sense of like how many people can actually access the product, right? So I think to date, we've put a lot of trash on chain. Like, I think that culturally, it's not like we have to wait and like see if people get more into tokenization or are like more open to it. I think we have the opposite. I think we have way too many people that have an asset that just want to tokenize it, and it has no liquidity off chain. It's definitely not going to have liquidity on chain, right? Because off chain, if anything, you get more credit because you know who your counterparty is, and like you can create this kind of trust in the TradFi system. In crypto, it's trustless. And so every side of every market has to be fully funded going in. And so as a result, like, I think the thing that's holding us back is smarter, more creative approaches to having liquid assets on chain, as opposed to trying to like recreate that liquidity on chain. Because if that's the case, like liquidity is always harder to get on chain, it's always more expensive on chain. And so as a result, the products wind up being worse on chain than they are off chain. You know, I think like as an industry, we consistently see people tokenizing from the supply side, but not looking at it from the demand side, right? And so my favorite RWA that we've seen so far is tokenized gold, because the growth of that over the last few months has been like insane. And you can see it's purely demand driven.
Yeah, I guess to your point, with the crypto market, you know, we have a lot of market makers that approach doesn't necessarily apply to RWAs, right? It's more of a pure natural market of supply and demand.
I mean, you know, we're getting a markets theory here, but like, I don't think markets create themselves, right? I think crypto native market makers, the problem is they're like the only ones that are comfortable with the technological risk, right? Like with smart contract auditing, with like securing multi-sigs, all of that stuff.
They're a band-aid,
right?
They're a band-aid on the liquidity problem.
Well, the problem is like in crypto, we have so much opportunity for like return that for most market makers, it's not worth it. It's not worth their cost of capital to allocate that liquidity into RWAs because they're less volatile.
I see. Yeah, there's a little bit too much predictability. So, Crystal, I wanted to ask you a little bit about what you're doing in terms of underserved markets. The other aspect of challenges, of course, is balancing compliance as well as inclusion at the same time. Oftentimes, the most compliant products are the least inclusive. So I'm curious how you're handling that from an underserved market perspective.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Josh. and we could piggyback off of what he said or touch on it. But basically, my background is regulatory compliance, right? Like this is my third launch that I've done, but it's the first for myself, so that's super cool, right? And it's also super scary. So what my background is always to be regulatory compliant in any jurisdiction that you touch, right? Like if you're doing a state license model, what makes us different than any other protocol, but also being supplementive and helpful to other protocols to be able to partner together is that our asset class is resilient. And when I say resilient, it's that because during up and down markets, we are able to provide consistent, reliable yield. And to your point, Josh, we don't touch or effectuate markets that we can't underwrite the credit risk. If we can't underwrite the credit risk, we won't lend. So basically, what we are trying to do at Zyvo is to be able to disrupt high interest consumer lending while bringing sustainable, reliable yield on the blockchain. And a lot of people, talk about on-chain, off-chain. I think that what we'd like to do is just be able to simplify stuff. It's technology, guys. We're in a transformative technology play to be able to make real-world use cases applicable for real people every day. That is what we do. And I think that that's where we need to start with. And the challenges that we have are not, it's an obstacle because now you're right. When we met 3 years ago, we were ahead of the curve with an RWA credit protocol. But now the game is catching up and we want to just help people.
Right on. Matt, when you're talking about the liquidity challenges of the industry, there's some analogies to NFTs, right? Before it was like the edge of show, it was the edge of NFT. I'm the founder of NFTLA, and I've heard the argument that NFTs are the precursors of RWAs, and that there's some kind of interesting context there. What are your thoughts in terms of how those liquidity challenges are similar or different, and how is Ondo trying to address these challenges?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see, I also enjoyed the NFT wave.
Yes,
big NFT enjoyer. I think the liquidity dynamics of the NFT market were just absolutely fascinating, right? We'd never seen anything like it with so much money being made so quickly and such little ability to truly underwrite like long-term value of things or like lack thereof. And like, who would have thought that like Milady's would be worth more than like most of the Yuga Labs assets, right? Like it's insane.
Essentially, are RWAs just boring NFTs with more predictable yield?
I mean, absolutely not. I think the worst RWAs to tokenize look like NFTs. I think like a house on the blockchain is like a terrible place to start for tokenization. Like if you can get like, governments to buy in and like the registry can be on chain, like obviously that saves everybody a ton of time and money versus like title insurance and all that. But like who wants to provide liquidity for this building, right? Like if I want to borrow against this building, I need to have somebody that's able to provide liquidity for it in case it needs to get liquidated. And yeah, I think that's like, I think we learned a lot of lessons from NFTs, but NFTs were also internet first culture and people that saw them understood them. People that see an NFT of this building on chain are not really going to know like what it is, right? Like it's much less recognizable than like a Milady or a Punk. So yeah, I mean, with Ondo's approach, we're starting from the most liquid stuff, right? We start with treasury bills, going into equities and ETFs next, and then from there we'll just keep going down the liquidity curve.
Laura, VanEck is a very culturally relevant firm. You guys have a zeitgeist and a sort of story. What's your thoughts in terms of the current culture of the industry relative to RWAs? What is most attractive, and what's the feedback you're getting in terms of things that are not quite as exciting to institutions?
So obviously private credit is one of the big ones that lately you hear a lot. When it comes to things more like money market funds or other, like the issue with like these more basic products is that you need to be doing more with it. You need to be able to like plug it into DeFi and get more yield. Otherwise, I call them black holes because they're just like basically sucking liquidity, doing nothing. But tokenizing ETFs or UCITS funds in Europe, that's one that people are also very excited about. The question here, it comes back to, again, like what's the audience, right? And like where can you tokenize this and list them? There's a big question on like jurisdictions And then the next question for like jurisdictions also is how does KYC and AML work, right? Can it be like cross-border or not? And then the other, I think one of the main challenges when it comes to also bringing new products to market is if we tokenize with this company and the next product with this other company, and maybe it's because they're both from the different jurisdictions, they have to KYC with both platforms, right? And that sometimes can like slow a little bit the adoption from just the onboarding process. But yeah, we're looking at what's one of our uses or ETF funds that we can bring next on chain. And then with that, working on the different umbrella of partners that we want to bring it live with. And also, why is it interesting and what can you do with it, right? So we're currently serving and would love to hear from everyone what you like to see next on chain.
Yeah, related to that question, I want to ask the audience, how many of you are building something in the blockchain industry? Just raise your hands if you're building some product or service.
Yeah.
All right.
I love it.
About a third of the audience. And of those of you that raised your hands, how many are thinking about RWA use cases for your product or service or integration opportunities?
Yeah, I love it.
So a fairly small group. I mean, which is fine. It's good feedback. I think in a lot of ways, I've felt like there's this separate siloed RWA world, and it's still sort of intermixing with traditional blockchain. And I'm curious what your thoughts on that. Is that going to be that way for a while? Are there things that everyone in the audience should be thinking about in terms of RWAs, or is it really a different audience that you're creating your product for?
So there's actually one example that I've been using way too much the past 2 months, and I think I'm over repeating myself, but access is not easy. Access is easy for everyone in this room because we know how to spin up a wallet and get on chain, or it's easy for us to hold an ETH address or any address and have our tokens there. Now, when you go into more of a more traditional RIA, financial advisor, wealth manager, and you tell them, and they're really excited about like a tokenized money market fund that is 24/7 liquidity and whatnot, and they ask about what's the onboarding process, walking them to the onboarding process, you already lose them. Because it's onboarding with the tokenizing agent, then selecting what chain they want to receive their tokens on, and creating an address, right? And already in the second step, like why this chain over the other one, or this one or the other one, and then you can give them the pros and cons. But what they want to do is just like log into their traditional platform, click, and that's it. So they want the click and go easy, and that's one step that is also a big impediment into. There's excitement for all of these products, but it's still not within their trading stack.
So is it going to be like a Coinbase or a Robinhood that's going to bring that type of product to the market?
Yes, absolutely. Well, that's the other question, right? Is it going to be first the crypto native firms that are going to make it happen? Or is it going to be the incumbent platforms that are going to be able to move
Fidelity
fast, right?
and the JP Morgans as
CME
well.
is already also building something. They announced it a few months ago.
So what do you think? Do you have an opinion on that?
Speed. I think the crypto native companies have a speed component that they can get it done first, but the other ones have great relationships that and like bigger distribution that could like slow it down a little, make it faster in that on the distribution side.
Matt, what's your audience look like these days, and how is it shifting?
You know, I think in general, the way I conceptualize our audience is they're basically the same people who use Tether. Right. There are people that didn't have access to dollars, and giving them access to dollars was like an enormous value creation event for all of society. I think it's very similar with RWAs, and that's why I agree. Like, it's going to be crypto native platforms that are able to underwrite like a little bit more regulatory risk. Whereas like if you look at Robinhood, like they have an enormous existing business that they can't like put at risk to like push the envelope from the regulatory side. And this is why I also encourage builders, if you're building in the RWA space, please do not try to make your moat permissioning, right? Like the number of people who have pitched me compliant Uniswap, like having an allow list on your contract is not a moat. And if you try to go down that route, like the incumbents will just be able to copy paste your code, right? Or like they can't even really underwrite your platform. They're gonna need to build it themselves. So you're better off building sort of at the more like pushing the envelope side of the risk spectrum rather than trying to like cozy up to institutions that need more regulatory clarity. Because if they need more regulatory clarity, if they need like more careful like control over who's allowed to own the assets, they're going to build that themselves because they need to feel comfortable internally. They need their legal team to sign off on it. And through a third party, it's always going to be harder.
That's an interesting perspective. And, I think for a long time, at least within the United States domain, everyone's asking for bumpers, for guardrails, for clarity, right? But to your point, it's a double-edged sword when it comes to innovation potential. And if there's super amount of clarity, then the big guys are just gonna take that playbook and run with it. So, Crystal, given your legal background, what do you see as sort of the regulatory opportunity over the next 12 to 18 months, and what are the tailwinds?
So I think with the regulatory bill on the stables right now is super, like at least in the US, is providing some sort of runway for capital to come back into the United States, which is amazing, right? Like US is the 800-pound gorilla, right? Like we have credit markets, we can underwrite the risk. So that is one field. To Matt and to Laura's point is that I respect everything that they're saying. I'm a big fan of both of you guys. I think it's going to take a little bit of a renegade to be able to be in the forefront. Like, it's not necessarily like Elon, but maybe one of us. And what I mean by that is that when you on the forefront, the banks are slow because they have so much political stuff to get overthrown, right? So if you create a regulatory compliant regime with whatever, whether you're doing Swiss or BVI or Cayman, whatever it is, I think you guys could surge forward. But the technology is what's key right now. Technology and team and being friends with Josh is really important. So pushing that forward is what I think is important for us to move forward. And I think that the U.S., once they get in the forefront, you can't stop it.
Right on. A lot of passion on this panel, and a lot of sort of more traditional use cases of RWAs have been talked about. And I know, Matt, you're not a fan of the real estate side of things. I'm curious what you think about, have you heard of Dado Durian? No? So one of my investors decided to purchase $10 million of durian crops in Malaysia. The thing that's interesting about that is Malaysia... who likes durian? Does anyone like durian? All right, a couple durian fans. Yeah, so if you like durian, you really like it. If you don't like it, you really don't like it. And it doesn't matter if you make it ice cream, whatever. It's a pretty funky smelling fruit. But Malaysia is the sweetest durian in the world, and it's the most lucrative crop. So it's been averaging a 30% yield over the last 10 to 20 years. So pretty consistent turns. But unless you go to Malaysia and you buy yourself some durian crops, you're not going to have exposure to that market. Are you looking at opportunities like that? Or if not, what are the most exciting, boldest things you want to see come into the RWA space in the next 12 months? And then I'll ask you both the same question.
I mean, good for your friend. But like, have you ever invested in an emerging market? Like, you might just get rugged, like, right? Like the government can just be like, sorry, that's not your durian farm anymore. Cool. Like,
it's all the durian in Malaysia. Like, it's not just one farm.
Yeah. So I think like to a degree, like these sorts of, private like investment opportunities are best done like in a packaged, format where like you can diversify that risk, right?
Like an RWA bag.
But I don't know that the chain actually adds anything there. Maybe it adds some access where like, durian farmers don't have a venue, right? And maybe you give them a venue, but that's like a very difficult go-to-market strategy. And it looks a lot like a private equity roll-up where like you have to be on the ground in Malaysia talking to farmers, going farm by farm. And at that point, like, you might as well just go to like the off-chain capital markets, right? Because they're more accustomed to that kind of structure. I think that the things that make the most sense to put on chain are the things that like people have speculative demand for, right? So I think it's things like gold. I think it's things like equities. I think it's things like options. And then I think there's separately just like savings instruments, treasury bills, ETFs, index funds, potentially to a degree, a little bit of private credit, but like once more, they can just rug you, which is why you have to do all this underwriting, right? Like that's the key part of that business. So yeah, liquidity.
All right. And Laura, what do you think is the breakthrough moment for the RWA space over the next 12 months? It's going to make you feel like a big shift has occurred.
Good question. I I'm honestly excited to see how the tokenization of equities and then also private companies will come to life, especially because I think it's a bit not chaotic, but the way it is right now, as you can't just like tokenize your stake at a private company without the approval of the private company first, right? Because they have generally the first rights to acquire that equity back if you want to sell it. So yeah, I think figuring out this part is going to be one of the first steps, and the other one just making more seamless, making easier for the average user to be able to access this world, right? Because again, for right now, it's easy for all of us here, but not for everyone that's not in this room.
I certainly would love to see that happen. I have some stock in previous ventures I've created that I wish was tokenized, and it's been very difficult to unload. So yeah, I think that would be a pretty tremendously catalytic opportunity if that occurred globally for founders to sort of be more excited about building businesses too and seeing more exit opportunities. So that could be pretty powerful. What are your thoughts?
I mean, obviously, I think that the future of finance is on the blockchain, right? Like you guys, like we've already digitized it, right? Like when someone gets their payroll, they already get an ACH or a wire, right? So now we're, how I said earlier, we're in the next boom or the next phase. So like for me, private credit and consumer finance is probably the quickest way to be able to tokenize anything from an RWA perspective. And I agree with you that you're not tokenizing real estate, you're tokenizing the yield off of it. Whereas with private credit, it's the simple smart contract, right? And so that gives the users and the retail the capability to have a little bit more security behind it. Like, right? Like, so that to us is just making sure that we're transparent, that we're loyal and we're honest to the users and the retail, and that we're doing the right thing. Like, that's where I see the future of finance. That's where all the top 10 U.S. institutions are going anyways, right? Right, Josh?
If you say so, yeah. You're the expert.
No.
Let's give it up to this really incredible panel of pioneers. I encourage you all to follow them and follow their companies on X and check out what they're up to. Ondo, Vanek, Zivo, thank you guys for joining us on this panel.
Thank you.
And if you enjoy conversations like this, you can also follow at The Edge of Show on X, join our newsletter, listen to our podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or Sling TV. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Josh.